With prayer, dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for bringing us all out here today to share our vision of what we want to do with your church. Dear Father, I ask that you open all our hearts up as we listen to Craig's presentation, and you just guide us, give us wisdom, help us be servant leaders as you want us to be. Dear Father, I hope that our light shines throughout your community as we move forward. I pray this in Jesus' name.
Alright, so first things first, you're not going to listen to me talk here any long today as we did last week, so that's big relief. It's a shorter presentation. What we are anticipating and hoping for is a lot more discussion, interaction, question, answer, comments, whatever the case. So as things come up, be thinking about it, because that's kind of what we're counting on, is to get what we see here, to help you guys understand kind of what we see, I guess. And the best way to do that usually is through interaction, not just somebody talking. So that's the goal. So as you have questions or comments or whatever, again, write them down if you can, if you think you might forget, and we'll go through it. So again, this is the second part of starting point. This part will be in some form in the class, but it's not really going to be so much in the class for like the new members coming to the church as much as everything we talked about last week is. This is more for how we're going to start doing things right now. A lot of it we're already doing is just kind of tweaking some things, and we'll kind of see that as we go through. So last week we ended with how do we get there? We talked about all the core values, we talked about our mission, we talked about our vision, and how do we get there? And this is what we've come up with kind of as a guideline to help us do that thing. So I'm going to briefly go through some of the things that we hope to accomplish with this, and then we'll go through that front page, we'll talk about the different teams. So the first thing, and this is important to notice, is that we hope to remain flexible. We're not, everything that we said last week, we know some of that's going to change sometimes, and that's fine. This one, we're hoping that it changes soon. We're going to talk about different teams and stuff, and we want for those teams and those ministries to have feedback right away almost. So this, what you're looking at here, is going to change. Hopefully it changes by the next couple of months. It's way different because I've had the input from all the people who are actually doing the ministries. This is, again, kind of the starting point, pun intended, for us to work off of. This is not the final product. We know that ahead of time, and we're anticipating a lot of feedback that's going to change some of that. Another thing this is going to help us do is it looks at everything that we do as a church. Pretty much every ministry and every budget item, plus a couple of other things, are all in the right-hand column of that sheet. So this encompasses basically everything we do as a church. So when we look at everything together, hopefully we'll see our strong points where we can kind of copy those. We'll see our weak points where we need to fill some stuff in. Maybe we'll see something that we're missing altogether. Maybe we'll see some things that we don't really do anymore, but they're still in the paperwork somewhere. But it should hopefully help us to be a lot more efficient with our mission and filling our vision. Organize ministries by common goals. This is probably the main point to what this does. Again, we'll look at the sheet a little bit more and talk about that when we do that. Help ministries work together is kind of part of that same thing, which we'll be talking about as we go through one by one. Helping teams to establish and achieve specific goals. I think one of the things we've noticed as we look at a lot of the things we do as a church is that we don't have specific goals set for how does what I do play into God's plan for this church. And as elders, that's our fault. Our job as leaders of the church is to make sure that we have some idea of what we're going to do, how that plays into what God's plan is for our church. And so this hopefully is going to help with that. help those serving see the big picture. There are also some things we do, and you know, a lot of us have been involved in that, where after a while it kind of, I'm doing this because I'm supposed to do it. You lose track of how it plays into serving somebody else, or how it plays into being honorable to God, and we're just doing it for the sake of doing it. And so by organizing things, we're hoping to, again, kind of alleviate that, help people to see what they do and how that plays into God's plan for us. You'll notice that little plus on that one. That's just because I'm really tired. Last night when I was, yesterday morning when I was setting this up, I knew I was going to be. So there are a couple things in here that are just visual cues for me. Don't get too hung up on them. All right, so we got this first sheet. Everything in that packet after this sheet is just examples of stuff. And we will talk about that a little bit, but really this first sheet is what we're going to be talking about the most. Again, as you look at this, if you are really involved in one of the ministries and you think it's totally on the wrong team, or you think something's wrong and it needs to be fixed, don't be thinking about that too much right now and get too worried about it. Again, we know this is going to change. We want it to change. We want input from the people in the ministries, the people doing the actual ministries, to say, you know, hey, I think I fit better here and all that. That's great. That is going to happen. So don't get worried about, you know, thinking so much about, oh man, I think this is wrong, that you miss some other stuff that we're talking about. So we're going to go through these teams one by one. The leadership team, this is not all of the leaders of the church. There are leaders up and down through the church. Every ministry's got a leader. There's leaders everywhere. This leadership team is simply, it's just basically the elders and the ministers. This is the team that is ultimately responsible for making sure that we're, you know, doctrinally pure, that we're following our core values, that we're doing what the Bible tells us to do. Everybody, of course, is responsible for that individually, and all the leaders of each team are. So, there are a lot of leaders in the church who are not part of the leadership team. Just don't get too confused on that. You also notice I got that one a little sideways. That's just because if you know the elders and ministers in this church, they're a little off, right? Alright, so the administration team we'll talk about a little bit more. This is generally the team that doesn't directly do a lot of the things that are like God's mission for the church. You know, God's got a lot of things He wants the church to do. The administration is one that enables all the other teams to be able to do what they do for the most part. And there's some exceptions to that, of course, but this is, without this team, you know, the government comes and takes a building because we're not doing what we need to do, and then that's secretary is going to be part of this team. Right now we don't have a secretary, I recognize that. But the secretary is probably going to be kind of a linchpin in this team because of the amount of time that he or she's able to be here and just keep everybody connected and stuff. Buildings and grounds is part of the administration team. Again, you know, God doesn't tell us, make sure that my church building is, you know, well put together. That's not a command. That's not what God's mission is for us. But without the buildings and grounds team, obviously we have a lot of issues. And so, kitchen supplies, office expenses, finance committee. Again, if you're wondering why they're a little off, go talk to the finance committee. Figure out. I'm kidding, kind of. So this is the administration team. As we look at these teams, our goal for these teams is that they are going to meet together, either without the elders first or together with us the first time. But all of these ministries have something in common in that they're all basically administration for this church. And so if they're able to communicate and they're able to work together, they can be a lot more effective. Again, they can work together as a team and find something maybe that we're kind of missing somewhere. Or, you know, yeah, I thought another team sort of did that, but we have all of the administration team here, and none of us do it. Maybe we're kind of missing it. There might possibly be some redundancies in there that they can help, you know, alleviate somebody of some work. So again, by getting the team together, you know, we're hoping to be able to make everything run a lot more smoothly. So that's the first team. And we'll move on to the worship team. again, this is the team that is primarily responsible for mostly Sunday mornings. You know, you have some carryover into other events and stuff. But this is a team basically responsible for making sure that worship is part of our service. Obviously, it's supposed to be. That's a big part of the reason why we come together. It's a big part of the reason why we're here. And so this worship team includes things like the music, which surprises nobody. The Lord's Supper, the communion time. This is everybody from actually filling the trays and making sure that they get, you know, cleaned back out and emptied afterwards, to the people serving, to the communion meditation. And again, this is one of them examples where I think we kind of lose track of what we're really doing. I could absolutely see somebody filling the communion trays and just thinking, yeah, I'm doing this because I'm doing this. If you recognize, this is actually part of what's going to help people worship. Because if we walk in and we get ready to do communion and, hey, guess what? We don't have any bread or juice. That's going to be awfully disrupting, right? And so seeing a little bit of a bigger picture of how that really plays in, I think is important. The welcoming. Now, this is one, you notice that one's yellow. That's another visual cue for me to make sure that I remember I have a very specific example for that. The welcoming ministry is something that Mandy and I both have tried to spend some time with. Peggy's doing it now. And a lot of us have had different ideas for it. And a lot of them have not worked. The welcoming ministry, I think, is really a place where we do just what I was talking about. You know, okay, I go stand at the door and I greet people because somebody has to. But what happens when, especially with somebody new, but it can be somebody who's usually here and they're distracted or off. But you come in, and we'll go with the new guest to First Risen Church of Dyer example. And they come in, they don't know where they're going, they don't know anybody. Maybe they have kids that they have to wonder, okay, where are they going? Okay, they work their way up to the front and they see some snacks and they don't really know, does everybody get those? And can I just bring them in here? And what do I do? And where's the classroom? And where do I take my kids? And all these questions we have. And for everybody who remembers what it's like to go to a new church, before Mandy and I came here, we went to a lot of different churches in this area. And if you are able to walk into a church for the first or second time and really focus on God and worship, you're doing something that I wasn't really able to do. Most of the time, you're sitting there, you're wondering, okay, how are they going to do communion? Are they going to look at me weird if I take it? Offering, well, how does that work? You know, where do I go? How do I do this? Are my kids okay in the back? Who are they with? And all those questions, the welcoming ministry, our version of it, best case scenario, takes that person when they walk in. They walk with them, explain, okay, here's this. You know, oh, hi, how old are you? What's your name? They have a student. This is going to be your teacher today. You can either stay in this room, or you can take your child with you to a worship service if you're more comfortable with that. But if you stay here, this is going to be your teacher. Her name is Mary Leah. Here's a friend, JC, she's about your age. Whatever. That person, okay, great. And then explain, as you walk them through, hey, we have some snacks over here, some coffee, help yourself. We'll be at 10 o'clock, we'll be in here, we'll be starting worship. Lord's Supper, this is how we do that. And then we'll pass the trays. And explaining how things work. And now those dozen questions that person was so focused on, so worried about, now they know the answer. They might actually be able to focus on worshiping God. And that's not just good for us as a church because, hey, somebody comes and they actually, they come face to face with God here. That's great for us as a church, of course. Maybe they'll stay. It's great for them. And that's what we're here for. We're not, again, we grow membership and all that's great. But that's a byproduct. That's not the goal, People walk in, welcome ministry, doing all of that stuff can be really huge. And so if they see it that way, all of a sudden it's a lot more than, well, I'm going to stand by this door and say hi and hand out bulletins. And we'll move on. Fellowship team. We have many ministries in here. Care and benevolence. Small groups. Small groups is another real good example. We talked about how things are going to change on this. Small groups is great. We have small groups in the fellowship team. Mostly that's where we see if we have to pick one team, which is what we did for this for now. We see most of our small groups are primarily fellowship oriented. Small groups, best case scenario is fellowship, discipleship, evangelism. It could be all those things. And so if you are one of the small group leaders who is part of the small group team, if you are one of the small group leaders and you think, man, I really think we need to be discipling in our small groups, that's really important. Or, man, I really think this is a great opportunity for evangelism. We can reach out and invite our friends to our homes instead of the church, and they won't be so intimidated and all that. That's perfect. So, as a team, we can change around where that goes, or add, maybe it's part of 2 teams, maybe it's part of 3 teams. Whatever the case is, that's great. So don't get caught up on, again, this is just right here, this is the only thing that they do. This is just where we have it for now. If the ministries see it being different, fantastic. Celebration Action Team. That's people who put together all the group functions and stuff for the most part. Prime Time. Ladies' Night. Don't ask me why that was crooked, I'll be in trouble. Hope and Hug. Stephen Ministry. All these things are, we think, primarily fellowship. Again, if the ministries see themselves somewhere else, that's great. We're certainly not here to dictate, oh no, you're going to do this, and that's not how we, this is where we have it, we'll change it. So we'll move on to the next team, is evangelism. Outreach. An example here of something that is not even really a ministry as far as how we're using it. It's more of a budget item, frankly. And there are a couple things like this. Outreach doesn't really put together a team and put together specific ideas on how to do outreach. Right now, it's mostly being used as a budget item to help with if Rebecca needs a little bit of something for the clothing drive. The outreach budget item is there for that. If the chess tournament needed some money, like it did the second tournament, we actually used a little bit of money from the outreach. And it's there to kind of help some of the other teams. And if that's what it is, that's great. If we can turn it into its own ministry, that's great. Warming shelter, we see as evangelism. Again, it's more than that, but primarily evangelism. Missions is probably our biggest opportunity to evangelize. It's not direct all the time, of course, as we send money out and support out to other people, but it's evangelism. Chess team, clothing ministry, we talked about. So that is evangelism team. We'll move on. Discipleship. This one is something that personally I noticed here. We've got the prayer team meeting on Wednesday nights in the back and praying. This is, again, more than just discipleship. Probably primarily this is discipleship. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of things that we do that are more important to us growing than prayer. The Sunday classes. We have a couple of classes going on Sunday. Hopefully, the main goal of that is discipleship. Again, a lot of fellowship going on, I'm sure. And maybe the Sunday classes, the teachers want to take their individual class and consider it more fellowship or whatever. That's fine. But one thing we did notice as we looked at the Sunday classes was some holes. We've got some things that we're missing. Some things, we probably should have some classes about this, at least sometimes, and we don't. And so as we looked at that, that was one spot we noticed, okay, we're probably missing something here. It gives us an opportunity to grow into that. Christian education, that's another example. It's not exactly its own ministry most of the time. It's kind of budgeted to help other things, bringing people in, for example, when we brought Dean Drew, some money came out of the Christian Education Fund. If that turns into a specific ministry with a real specific goal, that's fantastic. The other thing we notice about the discipleship is that's really the only things we have that are primarily discipleship. Now, again, there's maybe some holes in this presentation, but for the most part, we might be a little bit weak on that. You know, maybe that's something as a church we want to try to grow into a little bit. Next generation, that whole thing's sideways, it's crazy. This is children, I can say that, it's me personally. The children's ministry, the youth ministry, the nursery, and VBS. Again, next generation is kind of doing all of the other things just with the youth. So it's, you know, discipleship, evangelism, all these things just with the youth. So that one kind of is a little bit different than the other teams, but that's the last of our teams. So what we want to do is look at the next page. This is an example of what we're hoping all the teams are going to come up with. This is a leadership example. Again, this was never even really set in stone. So this is kind of a working draft that we're looking at right now. And our goal is, and you'll notice, okay, some of the different missions that the leadership team hopes to accomplish, some of the methods, how we're going to do that. And then we've got underneath there 6-month goals and long-term goals. And this might be the most important thing in this whole idea, is actually coming up with specific ideas, things that we want to do. Some of them 6-month goals were set like 2 months ago, basically, things we had talked about 2 months ago. And so we're going to reevaluate those in another 4 months. Right? Some of those things, establishing a shepherding program. Hopefully some of you guys have been hearing about that because that is something that we have established. Helping team leaders form teams and goals. Hopefully within the 6 months we will have a meeting with at least most of those teams scheduled to work with the teams reaching their goals. So what that means, that's our goal. I'm putting that up here right now because that's what we want to do. We want to have a meeting with each one of those other 6 teams. And the idea is we'll get everybody who is part of one of the ministries that's listed as part of that team, and anybody else who thinks they want to serve or they can serve, they have some kind of input, maybe it's just a one-time input, into something we should do or could do better in that area. So somebody's got an idea on, man, discipleship, man, we could really do this and it would be great. We want to have a meeting with that person and with everybody else in that team. See how, try to help them work together as a team and get something written down that specifically they want to do. And then 6 months from then, meet with them again. Okay, how did this go? Some things, if it didn't happen, find out why it didn't happen. You know, what was in the way, see if we can fix that for next time. If there's any way that the elders can support this team in achieving this goal, we want to do that. And so all of the teams will come up, hopefully, with something similar to this. It doesn't have to be formatted just like this. The next 2 pages are actually the next generation example. And again, this was never something that was totally set in stone. Mandy and I, and with some input from Mary Leah, put that together. And it's actually already, I know it's missing one of the pieces of input that Mary Leah did. But again, it's not set in stone. It's something for the other teams to look at. Looking at the leadership one doesn't have different ministries really. Looking at the next gen, it's got the youth and the children's and the VBS and the nursery. So it's got different ministries. So it's kind of how different ministries could fit together in a format similar to this one. And that is really just about it. Did I forget anything, guys, you can think of?
You didn't forget anything, but I just want to make a comment on what you talked about on the welcoming.
Yes.
5 years ago, we walked into this church on an Easter Sunday. I mean, maybe we had a little bit of an edge because the Yorks knew we were coming. So they probably told some people ahead of time, hey, our neighbors are coming in. But I don't know if it was specifically the welcoming people, but when we came in, I mean, we were welcomed with open arms. I mean, I don't know how many good mornings we had that morning, how many hugs and handshakes. that was one of the things that really drew us in and then drew us into this church. We see this church as our family sees this church as a loving church and a church, a place that we can call home. So I think that is very important. I don't know, I don't think that you necessarily have to be on the welcoming team to give someone a handshake or give someone a hug or introduce yourself. In fact, I'm going to get up because I want you guys to meet somebody that I met last week. There's a gentleman sitting back here. His name's Wayne. I had the opportunity to speak with him last week after church. I didn't realize it was only his second week here. This would be his third week, and he's here to just observe and share with us. And I want to make Wayne feel at home.
Thank you.
All right, I guess with that, then we'll open it up. We are, again, hoping for some questions, some comments, some ideas. So anything that anybody has, now would be the time. Wayne, yeah.
All right. Generally, with the direction of the church right here, did I understand that you really don't have like a central church or a headquarters like a lot of other churches, that it's therefore that policy is made more within the church than if it's from an outside source or the central church or headquarters idea?
Yes, Wayne. We are an independent church of Christ. If we align ourselves with a brotherhood, we call ourselves Church of Christ or Christian churches. But we are literally adamant that we're not a denomination. All the churches are independent and as such established their own constitution, bylaws. Doctrine is pretty much set forth by the Bible.